It's neat.
All right, everyone, we're going to get started. We're talking about monetizing podcasts, and by the end of this session, everyone in here will become a billionaire because you're going to know exactly how to monetize podcasts. We're going to be talking about branded podcasts, ad-supported podcasts, and also subscription-based podcasts. My name is Chris Peterson. I am president of Kindred Media at LionTree Advisors. LionTree is a boutique bank that spends a lot of our time advising media and tech companies on maybe who they should acquire or who they should invest in. And I spend a lot of my time focusing on audio-specific companies. Joining us today, we have Matt Turk, this Chief Revenue Officer from Megaphone. We have Steve Pratt, who is co-founder of Pacific Content. We have Zachary Davis, VP of Premium Content at Himalaya Media. And Janine Wright is the COO and CLO of Simplecast. And at the very end there is Jason Barron, who's Senior Vice President, Direct Response at Warner Media Ad Sales. So this conversation about monetization is going to cover a lot. So I think the first thing I want to say is I don't think there's going to be the right answer for everyone to say, oh, that's how to monetize a podcast best. We have some experts up here who are going to be able to explain the benefits of ad-supported, branded, premium, et cetera, and I think you're just going to learn a lot about how podcasts are monetized. To sort of level set as well for anyone that doesn't know, the podcast industry right now, ad-supported wise, is just over $500 million in total revenue. We have predictions that that'll hit over $1 billion next year. Certainly by 2021, I think most people would agree will be $1 billion industry. But there's a lot of money coming in different ways, which could exponentially grow that as well. So I want to go down the line here first and just throw out some thought starters for everyone, and then from there we'll kind of have a bigger group discussion, and then we'll also take some questions towards the end. Matt, first, tell us a little bit about Megaphone, and then specifically about the marketplace that you guys have and how that is a very unique feature for the podcast space.
Yeah, Megaphone, we launched Megaphone 5 years ago. It was launched from Slate Magazine as a podcast network. I was the publisher of Slate at the time. We saw a lot of growth, hence the launch of Megaphone. Back then we sold, or for the past 10 years we were selling the host reads contextually by show. It's advertising that works. It still works today. But we saw an opportunity to differentiate ourselves a little bit. We launched the marketplace 2.5 years ago. The challenge with the brand advertisers moving into the space has been targeting at scale, has been measurement, has been data. Because we are a publishing and distribution platform as well as a sales platform, we were able to partner with Nielsen, work with their 60,000 audience segments. We tend to work with their Exalate segments, which are about 17,000. And now we can target within our network a specific audience. So if you want to reach adults 25 to 34, high household income, in market for a new SUV, we can zero in on that audience. We were selling contextually and the marketplace simultaneously. We saw the opportunity for us to grow, to scale, to zero in on this marketplace. So we walked away from the contextual sale and left that up to some of the other experts, and we zeroed in on the marketplace. So what we do now is add an additional layer of revenue for our advertising partners. So for example, the Wall Street Journal, which is in our network, will sell their shows direct. We will add an additional layer of revenue because we're selling against audience at scale. And in many cases, it's significant. Our top 10 partners generate over $50,000 a month of revenue from us.
Great. Slightly different, Steve. At Pacific Content, you guys focus on branded content. If you can, I think just for the room, maybe give the 101, what is branded content and why brands are coming to you? Maybe just a little bit different in the way they may come to Matt.
Yeah, it's a really different model. So we're a weird company. I think every podcast company is maybe getting to be a little bit less weird as time goes on, but inside that, we're still weird. All we do is make podcasts with brands, and our job is essentially to help turn brands into media companies where they're making shows for audiences and building audiences themselves by making shows that are real, genuine shows and not infomercials and pieces of marketing. It's an amazing tool for building brand awareness and brand positioning and getting just massive amounts of time that you can't get on any other platform. If you think about things like online video and social media, the ability to, with audio, to get outside of screens and reach people where screens can't on commutes and walking dogs and working out, and to be able as a brand to have people in your ears really intimately for a half hour, and you're getting 85, 95% completion rates over and over and over again over time, you build really deep relationships with people and you build up a pretty sizable audience if you make an awesome show and not a bad piece of marketing.
Yeah. I was going to say, interestingly enough, we moved out of the branded content space, but I reach out to Steve probably several times a year, giving him leads because they're really good at it, and I trust that they're going to do a good quality work for the partners I turn over.
I feel so lame saying this, but because of what I'm about to say, but Matt is actually the OG of branded podcasts. He had one of the biggest ones, maybe the biggest one ever, a GE show called The Message, which was like 5 years ago. It was quite a while ago, and we followed up pretty quickly after with a show with Slack that did really, really well. So it's, anyways, he knows a lot about it too.
When I was leading the podcast strategy at iHeart, I spent, 50% of my first year in meetings with CMOs saying, we want the message. How do we do that? So thank you. Zachary, you're at Himalaya Media, where you're working with creators and helping them monetize in a different sense. So can you explain the model that you guys are working with at Himalaya?
So most of the money that's made in podcasting is through advertising, but to succeed with advertising and podcasting, you have to be relatively big, because the CPM, or I think it's a French term, but cost per thousand essentially is not all that high. So you need to be a very successful show. But there's another model that my company's really interested in, which is direct membership subscriptions. So if you're a niche show or a smaller show, but you have a really passionate following, then you can charge your listeners a certain amount per month for extra content or bonus content or some other kind of experience with you. So our platform enables a private discussion room, for example, so you could have your listeners ask you an AMA style, Q&A experience. And Himalaya was founded in China about 7 or 8 years ago. And in China, for when it began, advertising was, like here, the dominant way that audio was monetized. But they really went hard into direct subscription, direct support from listeners. And now the market over there is like 80% direct payment. And so the US context is challenging because of public media, we're so used to free audio, and it's like really hard to get people away from that. But I think there is opportunities for podcasters to think about how can I offer something of really tremendous value for a little bit, a coffee a month, and build up a direct revenue source over time.
Yeah, and don't worry, we'll dive into each of these in more detail and allow everyone to share their opinions on it. Janine, Simplecast is a hosting platform, so you are on a little bit of a different end here, and I want to kind of, I don't mean to pigeonhole you a little bit, but Simplecast has done an amazing job of sharing insights, and you guys are obviously investing a lot of time and effort into learning more about the space to then help your creators make better content, but then also monetize better. Can you share what you guys are learning and how that's helped the people that are putting content on Simplecast?
Yeah, so we're a platform with creator tools for podcasters. So we do hosting, distribution. We really are proud of the analytics platform that we built to help people kind of understand who their audience is and how they're engaging with them. And I think we're the only one on the stage here who represents both independent creators and enterprises. So we kind of see it across the spectrum. So like we were saying earlier, the overwhelming majority of the money being made in podcasting is being made in advertising, but actually the overwhelming majority of podcasters are monetizing in ways other than advertising, since it's a small fraction of the people who have audience sizes that are big enough to really tap into the advertising dollars that are out there. So you're seeing independent creators who are primarily monetizing through subscription models, tipping models, merch, exclusive content, live tours, all of these different ways that people are monetizing. And so we try and look at the whole ecosystem of monetization and how can they use our tools and how can we help them to better understand like what their monetization strategy might be. And some of the research that we've been doing on the ways that people start monetizing and how they monetize, I think has been really interesting. So for example, we've been looking at like the podcasting wage gap, and what we're seeing is like an emerging wage gap in podcasting between the ways that men and women monetize in podcasting. Now it's about 40% of creators are women, but still the overwhelming majority of the money being made in podcasting is being made by men. And the ways that men versus women are podcasting, and podcasters of color and LGBTQ communities. So we are going to take a bunch of different slices of the data and try and see what can we learn from that and how can we feed that back to our creators so that, like you said, our creators can use that data to make better content and then figure out what their monetization strategy should be and then most efficiently monetize once they figure it out.
That's great, and I think an important point for everyone to realize, and maybe it is helpful if you're new to the space, podcasting is still relatively new, right? It's been around for a while, but the growth on the audience side is fairly new, and then the monetization is also, right? Because a few years ago, everyone monetized the same way, and there really wasn't much data or any analytics to base it off of outside of the download. We'll get into that in a few minutes. But now, people like Janine and everyone on this stage actually is looking at how do we really crack that nut to learn how to monetize better, and that's the most interesting thing I think of the day. Jason, you are at Warner Media, and I'm interested to know how, from your perspective, it is working on audio in a company that, at least previously, is not an audio-first company, and also just sort of like, how are you doing that in such a big company?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. Really exciting time for us at Warner Media. We are a linear and digital-first publisher, and over the last couple of years, we've really looked at the audio space as a growth area for us. With our merger with AT&T and Xandr, we're going to have a lot of opportunities from a data and analytics standpoint, but more importantly, it's where our clients are spending money and leaning into. I've been on the direct response side at Turner. I keep saying Turner, it's Warner Media now, it's hard for me to remember. But I started looking at audio when I started seeing a lot of direct response advertisers, performance-based advertisers in the space, and it really piqued our attention. And then, over just in the last year or two, just attending events and meeting clients, more performance, not just performance-based, but Fortune 500 companies are really digging into the space too. So we want to attract and go where our fans are consuming content, and they're consuming content in audio and podcasting now. Whether it be sports or news or entertainment, all of our brands now are leaning into the audio space, and we feel like it's a really big opportunity to reach these consumers and our clients as well.
And just, I don't want to make sure we don't go over anyone, but I hope it's not dumbing down too much. Direct response would be, hey, I've got a cup of water here, go to cupofwater.com, enter code Chris, right, for your 10% off my cup of water, versus just cup of water is great, buy cup of water. So that's, if we're talking that's what we mean. Great, right?
Thank you.
Yeah. So this one's a really, really broad question, maybe the first of many. This could take the rest of the time, probably, actually. And it's open to everyone, because everyone's going to have a very different take on this. If I'm a brand and I want to come into the space, I won't use cup of water again, that's burned. And I've never been into podcasting, and I don't know much about podcasting. Probably a lot of the conversations you guys have are in that mindset of education and then guiding them towards, hey, come into the marketplace, or do a buy with these shows, or branded content, or partner with talent. What's the path? Like, how is it too overwhelming, or where to begin? And feel free to jump in.
I think you nailed it just off the top. It's education. It is a huge part of this, and I don't know. We all work together and talk to each other. Like it's a really great community, and I feel like you can even just hear in the first introductions, everybody has different business models and different solutions for people, and it's almost just a lot of listening to find out what people's business goals are, why they're coming in, and if it's not you, directing them to other people. So, and helping them understand where different use cases have worked really, really well in podcasting. So, we have a lot of people coming in and saying like, I would like business results of boosting sales in the next month. And I'm like, that's awesome. We're not the best place for you to making your own show that isn't an infomercial isn't going to do that. You'd actually have to make an infomercial. You should go to do the cup of water direct response, and I'd go introduce him to Jason or somebody else or Matt to say like, we actually have water. He can target water drinkers right away. I don't know. It feels like the more that we can do as an industry to help everybody have an amazing first experience and find the right business solution, even when it's not us, is the best practice.
Yeah, I would add, I think it's listening to your clients' needs and being consultative, whether it be, you need to listen to them, and whether it's they're looking for couponing, or they're looking for sales leads, or they're looking for just branding, you have to listen to what they need, and then you can put them in the appropriate programming. A lot of our brands, whether it be CNN, for instance, we are investigating a lot, but we're investing in a podcast studio, so it's going to be a mix of branded content we're going to be working with. We're going to be, creating shows around our talent, but we can't host read per se. So there's like a lot of intricacies in this business. So I would say it's testing. Could be coming in for 2 weeks, or it could be a 3-month campaign. It could be 100% share of voice. It really depends on what the client is looking for at that time and where they are in their journey. I would also add that I think everyone in the room might want to understand is that direct-to-consumer brands are really leaning into the space too. And their journeys can vary too. A lot of them want to test, like I said, for 1 or 2 weeks, or they're at a brand that want to do an on-site activation around a festival. We have the Adult Swim Festival in downtown LA this week. So could we do live podcasts? Could we do live podcasts at the DNC and the RNC? Like, these are conversations that we're having in the company.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I mean, we have hundreds of brands on the platform. We're really proud to have as many brands as we do, but the customer journey from a brand perspective right now is very stratified, right? So people will say, oh my gosh, how did you land this client or that client? And I'll have to confess, they started a free trial on our website, right? It seems to be that there's like the people who internally, there'll be a big podcasting initiative, and they're like, we're gonna put a budget behind this, we're gonna hire some experts, we're really gonna go full bore and make a high quality podcast. And they go to some of our favorite colleagues here, they go to Steve's company, and they really, they do the thing and they launch a professional podcast. Otherwise, we tend to get a lot of people who are, I'll say like mid-level marketing person or somewhere kind of middle in the organization, who either comes to us and says, oh my gosh, my boss thinks we should start a podcast and I don't know where to start. Or they say like, I have convinced everybody in the organization that it's a good idea to start a podcast. I have no budget for it. Like, where do I go from here? And then you try and figure out, what is it that they're trying to do with their podcast? Like, is it trying to drive sales or advertising? Is it for publicity of their CEO? Is it an internal podcast that they're going to use for compliance training? Or, like all different kinds. And so we help them kind of work out, like, what is it that you're thinking that you want to accomplish? And then let's find the right team for you, the right plan for you, and what success would look like for you.
Yeah, I agree. It's really understanding what your customer's trying to accomplish, what their goals are, what their KPIs are. If you're going to test the space, that's one thing. If you're going to make a commitment to the space, that's another. And if you're going to make a commitment to the space, it can look a lot of different ways, but it could be working with Steve and his team on creating content that's going to bring value to your customers. Pacific Content will tell you nobody wants to download an advertorial, so you really got to bring value there. It might be working with Warner Media and picking out some of their key shows that have a great deal of scale that contextually align with the messaging that you're going to be putting out, and it's going to help move the needle. And then it might be adding megaphone in to target at scale, because now we become a line item on a media plan. We can bring a great deal of volume to that audience, and we can do traditional attribution study at the end where we tag site start, we tag request for quote, and we can measure the results so the agency can go to the client and say, look, this worked, let's continue to do it. Or the client will say, this worked, let's continue to do it.
And so I think, outside of what the KPIs are for a brand coming into the space, and let's also use a talent as well, a talent that wants to start a podcast. How do we measure success from the content, right? And this is where we're going to talk about, I think, like, what matters most? Is it a download? Is it completion rates? Is it stop starts? What should you be looking at? And obviously the answer is different, but Zach, what do you guys look at to say, hey, to a talent, this is really working right now because of X, Y, Z?
So I do think that platforms like Twitter can be misleading about where value comes from. And so Twitter is a game where you have the most followers is winning this game. But a lot of times you'll see a tweet from a huge account and like 3 retweets, right? Like very little interaction. Whereas if you have 1,000 extremely committed fans or followers or listeners, that can be an extraordinary kind of thing. And so I think some of the new tools that we have, like subscription, can help you think about smaller but deeper engagement with your listeners. And I think that's what makes podcasting special, is it's a real commitment and a real relationship. And so some of the tools we're developing are helping podcast creators go beyond just passively, pushing go on your host and hoping people are out there, but actually having a two-way conversation. So we have a chat room feature in Himalaya, and as a host, you can ask a question. What did you guys think of this episode? How's your day going? Whatever you want to talk about, and have kind of conversations. And I think that success for a lot of the creators, obviously there's a financial dimension everyone needs, but it's also building a real community that feels like it has the substance behind it.
Steve, from the branded side, how do you guys have that conversation? Because you've already said it's not necessarily the way to sell 1 million rolls of toilet paper, but what's the way to show that a brand that they're actually getting that engagement and the podcast is successful?
Yeah, this is maybe a little bit too too basic, but it works when you actually get a picture of it. So we talk about this in kind of like a very basic XY graph, and the bottom one is creative bravery. Are you making an awesome show? So are you really going to push yourself and make the best show? And it doesn't really matter what the size of the audience is. It could honestly be for 5,000 people or 1,000 people, or it could be for 100,000 or 1 million people. Knowing who your audience is and deciding you're going to be one of the best shows on the planet for those people is number one to creating value, especially if you're a brand. You almost have this extra bar to pass where people are, wondering, are you trying to sell me something, or are you actually making a great show? So you really have to go hard on that. The vertical one is commitment, which is, are you going to tell all the right people about it? Are you actually going to market it? And in a lot of ways, advertising on other podcasts through some of the other people on the platform here are great ways to tell people about their next favorite podcast. When we think about measuring those, I would say we measure creative bravery, or are you making a great show, by completion rates. So out of everyone who comes in and hits play, are they making it the vast majority of the way through your episode? And we, like I said earlier, if you can get 80, 90, 95% completion rates on average of everyone who comes in a half hour, you're killing it. Like you can't get that anywhere else. So for a brand, massive win on that side. Downloads for us are almost like a shorthand for, are you doing the marketing well? Are new people coming in every episode? And if it's flat, there's other factors involved, obviously, but if you can keep marketing well, you're going to see new people coming in and sampling. And so if you're getting new people every episode and everyone who comes in is listening all the time, you win big time.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's important a little bit to talk about like the download, and that's kind of historically what people have tracked to see, like, am I successful? How many downloads of each of my shows am I getting? And I mean, in podcasting, so downloads and listens are basically the equivalent. You used to hear people talk about like subscribe to my show, like my show, rate my show. I think people say that stuff less now because, less and less people are actually subscribing and more people are streaming, listening to podcasts. But I think that's exactly right. I think the download is becoming a pretty antiquated measure of success. And as we've been able to layer on additional analytics on what's happening with your audience, it gives a lot more insight into who is it that you're reaching, how frequently are you reaching them, how much of your content are they consuming. So we feed back analytics like, of course, completion rates, but unique listeners. So is this somebody new to your podcast or somebody who's coming back week over week? And both of those could be important to you, right? Maybe your goal is to reach as wide of an audience as possible. So you really want to focus your campaigns on getting as many new listeners every week as possible. Or it could be that, my advertiser believes that people only buy after the 10th time that they've heard an ad for my product. So I want to make sure that my listeners listen to at least 10 of my episodes before, they move on to whatever, their next show or the next content. So we give people feedback about stop-starts, about skips, about what we think like their right length of their episode should be, unique listeners, which episodes in your back catalog are contributing most to your growth. And so all of these things, like you get a really good cross-section of how well is your show doing based on what you are going to define success as. Is much, much broader than just like how many listens am I getting to every one of my podcasts.
All right, the download is dead. I want to pivot. I think this is an important question, and I think we'll go to Matt and Jason first to get your sense of it. 2020, right, with the election cycle, hugely important to TV, radio, social media, etc. Is podcasting going to get its fair share this year?
Oh yeah, so we're about to announce we're going to have a daily impeachment podcast that's coming in the next couple of weeks. Like I said earlier, we want to have on-site activations. A lot of our political pundits are going to be having or be guests on podcasts, and we even intersperse our talent. Like we will have an NBA event and some of our CNN talent will be there. So we envision a big push in podcasting. Like I mentioned earlier, we're going to have our CNN podcast studio. A lot of it is going to be around political, but we want to remember also we're never going to win if we don't diversify. So it's not just politics on CNN, it's our original series and our docuseries, and we're going to be launching a lot of accompanying podcasts to those as well. But yes, the political season is on, and we are very invested in the audio space as well.
And specifically, like, our candidate dollars going to be coming in? Are we going to be hearing... That's the question.
That's a great question. So at our company, there's a whole team that's dedicated to working with that type of money, whether it be political or advocacy. I have not seen that yet, but that's really an interesting question. And I haven't seen it, but I imagine it might.
We're definitely seeing it. I assume you're seeing it too.
This impeachment episode brought to you by Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
and then honestly, and CNN, you're obviously not going to have an Anderson Cooper doing a host read or an endorsement, so it's more a matter of the entertainment-based content or the HLN crime and mystery that would be more in that genre. So,
yeah, I imagine there's going to be a lot of political dollars flowing into podcasting. We're in a different position than Warner Media. We don't own any of our content. The shows, many of the shows, they're very personal to the hosts of the shows that are within our network, and what these hosts don't understand is if you accept one political ad, you have to accept all political ads. You have to charge the same amount for those. And so I think the individual podcasters are going to kind of struggle as they figure that out. We ran a campaign. We reached out to all our partners, asked if they would accept political advertising. Some said no, most said yes. We got some advertising for Mayor Pete last week in a couple states. We started running it. People would tweet, and so the hosts came back to us and asked us to pull the ads. So we're not going to be, we probably won't be driving a lot of the political revenue as we go into 2020. It's going to be folks like, I keep wanting to say Turner as well, but Warner Media.
I think it's fascinating though. Like the guest stuff seems to work really, really well. Like Mayor Pete and Andrew Yang, and they've had massive impacts by being guests.
He's been like on 50 podcasts already, something like that.
I have an extremely hot take that Joe Rogan could be the most influential media personality in 2020. He's had multiple candidates on from the Democratic side so far. Wait until Trump comes on, and I promise it's the most downloaded podcast ever. Yeah. But the Bernie Sanders interview he had, I think, is at 11 or 12 million views on YouTube, and who knows how many. But like just thinking of the audience and how big that is, call it 15 million total downloads and video views, and a potentially completely non-political audience, or at least Republicans, Democrats, undecideds. Where else can you get that kind of reach? And that's what makes the podcast space unique. So I think the guest angle is going to be hugely important, and if they're not looking at it, it's a huge miss.
Yeah, I would just add one more point to that. So we can geo-target. So I would say, if you think about the election, there's really going to be 5 or 6 states in this country, correct, that will decide this election. So if we can geo-target to Michigan and Ohio, I think that could be really compelling. We do that. We can do that with some of our arrangements on a local basis, but on podcasting, we can do that, so I think that's going to come in as well.
I think you also see ad dollars from bills and initiatives like the local issues, and people using kind of hyper-local geolocation information and topic-based podcasts to really target those communities too.
And any branded political podcasts coming our way, Steve?
You know what? It's funny. So I'm Canadian. So
you just had an election.
But it is funny. In the last cycle, Hillary Clinton had her own podcast. I know it may not have worked out so well, but to me, that's another really interesting thing. Is like, why would you not, as a candidate, have your own podcast and build your own audience and totally own your message for that group and be able to market that? It seems like a no-brainer, and I haven't heard anybody doing it yet. They may be. I'm not totally 100% in the loop, but I haven't heard about it yet.
Right. Maybe they're waiting to spend those dollars once they get the nomination.
Yeah. Apparently, Rudy is doing his own soon. Right?
So I'm happy to start opening up to crowd questions. We've got just a little over 10 minutes, but I wanted very quickly, and Zach, I think I'll go to you first, of the synergies between free and premium content and freemium. I think that's something that is, out of all the topics we're discussing, is probably the newest in the podcast space, and companies like yours are trying to figure it out, and certainly there's been a lot of attention in the last 6 to 12 months and a lot of dollars poured into that to try and crack that nut.
Yeah, so people like free, so how do you then get them to pay? And I think, the App Store and other kind of models have shown if you let people try it out, and then you can charge them for some other exclusive experience. So I do think freemium is a model that we're excited about. I think you'll see more of that. There's a few things that I think about that open up interesting opportunities. And the one is, there's this YouTube show called Hot Ones, and it's people having a conversation while eating progressively spicier hot wings. And it's kind of, very amazing show. And what's interesting is to find out, well, how do they make their money? It's like 70% hot sauce sales. So they actually, the content is not what makes the money, it's some other special sauce. So I think you can think about that too as content creators out there, is perhaps I make the podcast and perhaps that is free, mainly. And then you can think of maybe live touring as an important element of this. Maybe merch is a piece of what you do. You can be really creative about this. And I mean, the music industry, I think, has found this as well, that CD sales collapsed. And so people had more disposable income to spend on touring. And so you can think of content as part of a larger monetization strategy.
And we're seeing a lot of those deals, especially from major networks, are sort of taking the record label approach 360. That's not just, hey, we want to rep your podcast and we're going to split the money we make on advertising or subscription. It's, oh, and by the way, we're going to take a percent of everything you do. And this turns into a Netflix show, or you go on a tour, t-shirts, we're taking it all.
Zach, in China, you guys make a majority of your revenue from the listeners. What's the difference in our market versus the Chinese market? Sorry to ask that question.
I think partly it's just historical, that they didn't have the kind of free NPR tradition that we do here, and RSS technology, here developed. But the other thing is to think about what kind of content is being made. And in China, actually, the majority of content sales is for self-help and professional development content. So it's things that make your life better, and it's not just entertaining you during the boring commute. So, I mean, some of, I think, where you might see audio going in the US, and something I'm actually developing right now with this project called Lyceum, is think about audio that has a more direct benefit to people's lives, and that's something you are a little more willing to pour out some money for.
Yeah, I guess I would also say we're still kind of deciding as an industry the way that we want creators to be compensated for their intellectual property. And, you know, whether it's a subscription model or whether it's an ad-supported model. I mean, you think about like the streaming services that are now pushing more and more people to listen to podcasts from a business perspective. Every time somebody listens to music, they have to pay musicians royalties. But every time somebody listens to a podcast, it is free for them, for the most, unless they have paid to provide that content, right? And I think podcast creators as an industry, as an organization, whether they think about unionization or whatever, need to think about, is that the monetization model that they want to be the model for this industry? Like, should they be getting royalties as well, or are they comfortable just trying to get as many ears as possible and tapping into the ad dollars that are coming into the space?
Yeah, we could have an entirely different conversation in 12 months, right? The most generic question to end panels, but I think it's important just given the vast experience that we have up here. Let's make some bold predictions, and they don't have to be necessarily around revenue. You know, anything with the audio space, whether it's smart speakers or the dollars, when it's going to become $1 billion, whatever it is. Matt.
Bold prediction. Well, I mean, mine's around revenue. I said this at the podcast movement. I think we're going to break the $1 billion barrier next year because the brands are aggressively moving into the space. They made up about 38% of the ads revenue this year. 10% of the 10% of the space was branded content. That's largely the brands, and with folks like Megaphone and others that are allowing these agencies to put podcasting on a media plan, to retarget, to put frequency capping in there, to really build podcasting into part of a robust digital plan with measurement and data. The brands are going to flow into the space and push it over $1 billion.
Quick question on that. You said 38% is brand advertising.
Brand
rough
awareness.
estimate 2 years ago, what was that?
Probably half that.
Okay.
And when we got into the space, there was less than 100 million being spent. Now I think it's close to 600 million this year.
Yes. Yeah. Perfect. All right, Steve.
I'm going to echo something that was in a previous panel just around how the future of what podcasts are has not been invented yet. It's still, it's still in its infancy, and the formats and the type of storytelling and the things that you hear and you're like, oh, that's a podcast. I think in the next few years, we're going to hear a whole bunch of stuff that does not sound like a podcast today. And on our side of the business, we're seeing internal communications, for companies that have thousands and thousands of employees, putting out internal podcasts to build culture or share things. There's learning and development podcasts. We have not heard a ton of game shows or soap operas or sitcoms. Zach's got a learning platform. I just feel like the future of creativity and the different ways that, to Janine's point, the different ways that people are going to find to monetize it, the best stuff is all still to come.
Yeah, I think everyone's going to start learning through audio. That's my prediction. I also think we might slowly stop using podcasting so much, and audio will become more important as we think about getting beyond the Apple ecosystem for what audio is.
Yeah, I think Steve is exactly right. I think we don't even know what a podcast is yet. And I think as we move to become an audio-first culture, we have fewer and fewer devices that will actually have a screen on it. Automatic delivery of audio. I mean, you're going to see shorter and shorter pieces of audio delivered. It will be just like, every time you Google something, you get an audio clip about this, or you ask Alexa about that. You'll be in a grocery store and, look at a shampoo, and it will deliver you a clip about where that shampoo came from and where you can get the discount code. And, it will become so much more ingrained in our life, and it won't be what people, I think, stereotypically now think of as a podcast, of like a long-form interview or two dudes chatting.
Yeah, I completely agree. I see podcasting being integrated into some of our apps. Working for AT&T, a company like AT&T that has 170 million consumers in this country, I can see the data and technology. I think that's the area that it's going to change the most. Like from an attribution standpoint right now, it's very early stages, and that's why the business hasn't scaled as much as it could have or should have. But I think in the next couple of years, with a lot more attribution and data coming to the mix, I think it's going to grow exponentially. And I think the quality and the premium content is going to grow, and the quality of the advertiser is going to grow. Fortune 500 companies I'm seeing are really starting to embrace the space.
Great. Any questions for the panel? Yeah, right here.
Well, GDPR is going to certainly affect in California, but if you can get people to opt into accepting the messaging, then we should be okay. We're going to be 100% compliant with GDPR. But there are other ways to target. You can target contextually. You can, there are third parties where you can target by keyword, things of that nature that wouldn't influence that. And those are all being explored as we're trying to figure this out.
Yeah, and I think part of my background is programmatic, so very familiar with GDPR, and I think that's the next iteration. There isn't a lot of programmatic podcasting right now, but as we talk to some of our partners and we integrate and have these type of conversations, I think there will be a safe and compliant way. We're also GDPR compliant, and it started mostly in Europe, but I think there's going to be solutions that we're going to be able to figure out.
I was going to say one really interesting thing on that is, from a brand perspective, a lot of people don't realize that, people, particularly people in marketing, don't always realize brands have a ton of superpowers to reach people all on their own, and that a lot of the time the people they're looking to reach are already in their own channels, and it's this idea of like opening them up and actually thinking like a media company and being like, how does HBO market Game of Thrones? Let's do that with our podcast, and we have reach of tons and tons of people to do that. Or even just the places of saying, where am I going to actually advertise? If I'm trying to reach, a business audience, advertise in business shows where you know that the subject matter is going to match. I feel like those like very basic things are still going to be there no matter what.
Yeah, and I think we built our platform, our analytics platform, privacy first, GDPR compliant, CCPA compliant. We're really proud to have invented some tech around anonymized and de-identified fingerprinting so that we can get a lot of insights from our audience. And you'd be surprised how much you can learn without having to know PII about people. I don't need to know what your name is or what your ethnicity is in order to be able to figure out kind of what content you're probably interested in and how I cater that content to you, and
I think where the challenge is going to be is when digital advertisers are going to try and get into the podcast space, because they're going to want the same type of compliance, or mentality, that they're bringing from the digital marketplace.
Yeah, I think there are ways to do it. You can get attribution data. You can get all of the things that you need without actually putting a pixel on somebody's phone, right, or knowing that they signed up for an account and what their account information is. Yeah.
All right, well, I think that's about it for us. I will leave us with one quick thought just to go off of, I think, what you guys were echoing, of how quickly the audio space, not just the podcast space, is evolving. This used to just be something you heard on your radio station or was in the background on a radio station, and now as cars move over to CarPlay or Android, Amazon, and then also smart speakers are going to be around you wherever you are. It is going to be used for learning. It is going to be used as an assistant. And, podcasting, I think, can't be pigeonholed into what you think of a podcast right now, of an hour-long conversation or a really long serialized thing. It's all